morning, I'm Chris, and I'm an anchor here at Ocean City Church. Please stand for the reading of the Word. Romans 12, 1-2. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. From John 15:4. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing.
All right, well, thanks be to God for the beauty and the power of his word. How we doing, 11? All right. Well, man, we are in a new series. I really love where we have come from, being in the book of Job for a pretty long season. And it was really good to have a season where you feel encouraged by the book of Job, because it really, if you take a certain approach, it can be a dark one to dig into, because it is about suffering. But it's more about the one that we suffer with and the one that suffered for us. So it's been an amazing season, but this is a series, Proximity, that we have been talking about as a staff, as a leadership team, as a church, kind of behind the scenes for probably 18 months. So I'm excited that we're doing it. We don't do a lot of like individual series. We're usually in a book of the Bible, but to have a series that's kind of centered around spiritual discipline, but that word can kind of sound like, that's a bummer. It's discipline, right? But this idea of proximity, being shaped by grace to be closer to Christ, like that there's something in the way that we live, in the way that we operate as human beings, where God can shape us. The same grace that saved you is the same grace that shapes you, is really what it's all about. And it's not just so that we're better folks, like we go out into the world and, we're a little bit better humans. Yes, that's a byproduct, but the most important thing is that we're improving our proximity to the one that saved us. Jesus' death, his burial, his resurrection, the things that he's done for us, not calling us up by moral acts to try to find and get to God, but he came down in the midst of our sin and our mess and our suffering and our shame, and died for us to make a way that we might be close to him, that we would be reunited with the one that created us. That's what proximity is really all about. That's kind of the thing that we're trying to do, is close that gap. Jesus is never far from us, right? As the Apostle Paul would say in Acts, when he's at the Areopagus trying to explain to the people that were very spiritual and philosophical that he's in him, you live and you move and you have your being. He's here. You're never far from him. But we tend to find ways to run from him, and that's really what we want to talk about today. I was thinking about the idea of how important proximity is and how it changes just when the gap changes a little bit. In probably 85, 86, I was in middle school, many years ago. And I went to a private school. We had chapel services on Mondays. And you might think, okay, chapel service was lame. And it was, for the most part. But you learn something when you get to a certain age. Like when you're in elementary, there's a lack of self-awareness when you're just in elementary. You go in there with the elementary kids next door, and you'll see, they came with two different color shoes, shirt on backwards, and just didn't care. There's like fun all the way, and there's something cool about that, like the idea that, hey, we can roll up in this joint, and we're not navel gazing. But our sin and our hormones, when we get in middle school, start to all of a sudden we notice we notice the opposite sex, and then all of a sudden, what do? We notice ourselves. We're like, I got to straighten this up. Like, I got to figure this thing out. But chapel service was one of those. In a private school that was Christian, independent Baptist, there was something called, there's kind of the Christian joke, if two young, people are, getting a little too close, leave room for the Holy Spirit. You got the Holy Spirit's at least 12 inches big. Like, we know that, right? So you got to put something in between you. And that was kind of the way that we operated at my school. There was no getting close to the opposite sex. It was just, you're 12, 13, 14, and your brain's exploding. You just wanted to be close to the girl that walked in that smells good and looks good, and you don't know why you're liking that, but you are. It's all happening at the same time. So chapel service was one of those ways that we took care of that. It wasn't like nowadays at Fletcher Middle and High School where it's like mob mentality. Everybody moves in like mobs and, walks around like this and doesn't know where they're going. We were still, back then, the 80s, you're in lines. Like, you leave your desk and it's, you get up and you walk in line, alphabetical, all the way to chapel, which was it was a little less than a quarter of a mile, probably 500 yards, 600 yards away from the main campus. So you'd get in a line and then you would file into one of the worst creations in all of religion, which is a pew. Which are terrible. Like, what you're sitting in is much, much better than a pew. But for a middle schooler, the pew was solving a problem of proximity for the middle schooler. Because with chairs, you've got separation between each human being. With a pew, you can get thigh to thigh, right? So you've closed the gap of proximity with the person that you want to get close to. And all of a sudden, the middle schooler who's not great at math becomes great at math, because you have to be a little good at math to walk in and know exactly how many seats are in each row, so that you make sure that the row doesn't break between you and the girl that's in front of you, that you positioned right there so that you would sit next to her in the row throughout the entire chapel service. So the guys that didn't do math good, the row would go, you'd be thinking, we're going to sing, the hymn, the tie that binds, and join hands across the aisle, and I'm going to be holding her hand, it's going to be great. And then the aisle would break, and then you'd be the furthest away from the girl that you wanted to be next to because your math was bad. You know what I'm saying? But all of that is about proximity. It's all about getting in a space that's close. And when you're at that age, you'll do anything to kind of get in that space. You don't know why. You're just like, I like her, and that's just what's happening in my mind. What's interesting, the Apostle Paul would say in Philippians chapter 3, in his relationship with Jesus, he knew and understood that there was nothing better than being in close proximity to Jesus. There was nothing better than growing in his knowledge of his relationship with Jesus, who Jesus was, what he has done, the resurrection from the dead. He knew that that was the most important thing. His reference to it was, everything else in life that you think is valuable is dung. It's garbage. It's trash in comparison to close proximity to Christ. He put it at the highest value. So it's not about religion, it's about relationship. And that's what this whole series is about. And as you kind of dig in and you think about this idea of being shaped by grace to be closer to Christ, it's about this passive formation that's always happening in culture, but moving past that to intentional practices that move us closer in proximity and closer to Jesus. If we go back to Romans chapter 12, I want to look at verse 2 for just a second, because it really kind of encapsulates where we're headed today. So, do not conform to the pattern of this world. So there's a pattern, a conforming to the pattern of this world. That would be like, the things that we automatically conform to in our culture. Now, there's some of those things are benign. There's things about our culture that aren't necessarily bad, but there's also patterns that the Apostle Paul's talking about in the Roman Empire, and for us in 2025, in the worlds that we live in, patterns that we don't want to be in. And in fact, when you get saved and become a follower of Jesus and believe in Jesus, it is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of the story. And when you look at Romans chapter 12, there's a whole 11 chapters preceding it. And the Apostle Paul's trying to push the Roman church and push the believers and to understand that something has happened that you can't take any credit for. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. There was no way anybody was going to get over that on their own. There wasn't going to be this moral high ground that you could climb up, that Jesus had to come down and do everything. And when he said it is finished, it was finished. But as a result of that, now let's look at what it looks like. He blazed a path. He made a trail. He made a way where there was no way. So how do we walk down that road to get closer to Jesus, the person that did everything for us? So he's saying, don't conform to the pattern of this world. There's something that we're doing. Our sins still in the picture. The penalty of sin paid for, done. Your sins past, present, future, which is kind of scandalous, paid for by the cross of Jesus Christ. But the power of sin still moving on planet Earth. We talked about that in the book of Job. When you look around, it doesn't take very long to see sin still exists, not only in you and me, but across the globe. So what does it look like to be transformed now by the renewing of your mind? It's interesting, the language, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now, classically, across history, scientists said that that's not something, if they read this passage in Scripture, if some scientists that didn't know much about the Bible saw being transformed by the renewing of your mind, they would say, prior to the 20th century, they would say you can't really renew the mind. It's the most inflexible of the things that are going on in our body. The brain cannot be renewed. Once it gets set, once you get through early childhood and to a certain stage in life, it's pretty much set. The pathways and the neural pathways are going to be the way that they're going to be. And if there's damage, recovering from that, you can't regenerate brain cells. I remember thinking about that growing up. It's just not, there's not this flexibility. But as we got into the 20th century and all the way into the 1960s and 1970s, what God has known all along, because God created us, God designed us the way that we are, is that you can renew the mind. That the brain actually, in many ways, is very, very malleable and can adjust. Now, there's stubborn areas we'll talk about today, but the idea of transforming and renewing the mind, God's been talking about it. It's been in Scripture all this time, and now in the 20th century, scientists are like, well, we found something out, that you can renew the mind. You can transform the mind. Listen to this. Historically, scientists believe that the brain stopped growing after childhood. But current research shows that the brain is able to continue growing and changing throughout the lifespan, refining its architecture or shifting functions to different regions of the brain. Now here's this term. The importance of neuroplasticity can't be overstated. It means that it is possible to change dysfunctional patterns of thinking. Now go back, we'll stop in the middle of this quote, we'll come back to it. Go back to the Romans 12:2. Pattern of this world. We read this quote from Psychology Today. It's the patterns of dysfunction. Now bounce back to that quote from Psychology Today. To change dysfunctional patterns of thinking and behaving. To develop new mindsets, the renewing of the mind, right? New memories, new skills, new abilities. So this idea, it says at the very beginning of that quote, neuroplasticity. I mean, if anybody has heard that term, if I was going to put a name on this talk, it would be spiritual neuroplasticity. Let's say that together. You ready? Spiritual neuroplasticity. My daughter wasn't going to be at church today, and she goes, "What's the talk about this week? What can I look forward to as I listen to it on the stream or whatever?" I said, "Spiritual neuroplasticity." She's like, "I'm glad I'm not at church." I'm kidding, but the idea is certainly one that's derived in social psychology circles and in science. Well, what's amazing is when you read Romans 12:2, you see it laid out in Scripture, and the Apostle Paul's intent, if you know the book of Romans, is exactly that there's patterns in the mind that have been formed by the world around us, have been formed by the way that we've grown up and the things that we've engaged in along the way. Let me give you a definition of neuroplasticity, and then we'll talk about it briefly as we dig in. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to recognize its structure, function, and neural connections in response to learning, experience, injury, or environmental changes. This process involves synaptic pruning, dendritic growth, neurogenesis, enabling adaptation and cognitive flexibility. You understand all that? Did you get all that? I mean, in the basics of this is the brain can make adjustments along the way. That even as adults, even as a 50-year-old, the neural pathways can make adjustments. Ones that have been going down firing in a certain way for a long time can adjust. In other words, habits, things that you've done, injuries that you've gotten. My wife was a speech therapist for many years, and somebody that had a traumatic brain injury. When you work on their speech, what are they doing? They're rerouting those neural pathways. I think about it like this. Like if you think about trails in the woods, my in-laws have a farm in South Georgia, and there's a big main house, and then there's a cabin that's about 500-600 yards away. In the summertime, you cannot see the cabin from the house. Like it is, because the woods, the trees, all the stuff, all you can see is the trailhead. In the winter, you might be able to look through and barely see it if you know what you're looking for. But there's a trail, a very defined trail that nobody created. Like nobody went out there and intentionally created the trail. But because of the necessity of getting from point A to point B and point B to point A, over the years, a trail started to get driven through the woods. It's the most prominent trail on the property. It's 28 acres out there, and that is the most defined trail. My kids would spend the night, when we would go there, when my kids were little, by the time they got to be 8, maybe I'll just say 10, 11, we and all the cousins, there's a whole truckload of them, some of them are here at church, they would all stay in the cabin with no adults, and we would all stay in the main house. It was kind of our opportunity. We're on the farm. Like, what could happen? We're just going to let them stay 600 yards away. We're going to do our thing. We'll let the wild Indians do what they're going to do. But in the morning, because they're little wild Indians and they don't really fend for themselves, they would blaze a trail back to the main house because they needed food. They would get up at 11:30, expecting breakfast to be cooked right then, and they'd find cold eggs. But that trail was blazed. Now, think about it this way. Neuroplasticity is the idea that if something disrupted that trail, that you would find a new way. Like if a tree or a storm, and it's happened over the years. If something happened, either you're going to have to figure out a way to route back through that trail and cut the branch, bring the saws out, and it's going to take time to get back through that route. I would say a tree would represent maybe an injury to the brain. But maybe that's just not the best way to get there. It's not effective. Or maybe there's just a better thing to have to go this particular way. Or there's a shorter route that we didn't know about. Like there's a shorter route through the woods. But this is what we've been doing all this time. But now we found there's a shorter route. And on that route, there's a bunch of blueberries and blackberries that you can pick on the way there. Okay, now we're talking. We're going to have a little fun, and there's going to be the traveling between the barn or the house and the cabin is going to be fine. But to start a brand new trail through those woods is going to be work. I mean, you've got thicket, you've got a lot of stuff to mine through, to dig through. I mean, you're getting out the machetes, you're getting out the tractor, you're getting out a lot. You're going to be cutting some trees down. You're going to be doing some work in order to create that new pathway to the cabin. Are you picking up what I'm laying down? That's the renewing of the mind. You've got the old pattern maybe that's in place, something that's been conformed to the pattern of this world that's been blazed, and maybe it's not the best way. Maybe it's the worst way. Maybe it's a sinful way. And now you're a follower of Jesus, and Jesus has opened up the doorway through his death, burial, and resurrection for us to have relationship, to boldly approach the throne of grace, it says in Hebrews. So what does that look like? To walk down a new road and get to maybe even a new cabin where Jesus is. To narrow the proximity between us and him. So I want to look at this idea of spiritual neuroplasticity, kind of open up why do we care? Why can't we just live our lives? We pulled our Jesus ticket. If you become a Christian, we're going to heaven. Now we're going to go back to living our normal lives. We got to make money and raise kids and do our thing. Why does it matter? Why is Derek even talking about spiritual neuroplasticity? So that's of the two questions today. The first one is, why do we care about spiritual neuroplasticity? And then secondly, where do we start? We're in this series, Proximity. We're going to get real practical next week. We're going to do some things together in terms of spiritual discipline. As a church, as we move through Lent, but where do we begin? Like maybe you've never, made routines or practiced anything in spiritual. Like coming to church is a spiritual practice. Like you being here with us singing in unison together is a spiritual practice. It is a rhythm, and some of you have neural pathways set. Like you have a hard time being at home, like not going to church on Sunday morning. That's a good neural pathway, by the way, right? If you're at home and you're not here, and you're just like, I think I'm not going to come. If that disrupts you a little bit, your lead pastor likes that. But if you look at this, like, why is it important? Like, why do we care about neuroplasticity? I want you to look at the top 7 influences on neuroplasticity, your beliefs, habits, disciplines. Like, what's routing your brain right now? Like, what are the things that influence the way that you think? What are the things that develop habits? What are the things that are developing your ideology, your beliefs, the things that are prominent in your lives that kind of force you into the way that you act and the way that you operate on planet Earth? All right, I looked up the top 40, but I've narrowed it down to 7 of the top ones. The first one is pretty easy. Parents and early childhood environment is where everything gets shaped, like at the very beginning. A big line share in age 0 to 4 or 5 is where a lot of those neural pathways are getting set. I mean, if you're a parent, you see it kind of happening. The learning, the process of learning, they learn so much from you. Culture and society is another one. Like you may not know it, but passively, you are American. Like you just are. You can say, well, this is where I grew up, but we're all different. No, if you went to a foreign country and they saw you, they would be like, American. They would be able to identify you like very quickly. I mean, we have a way. We have a thing that we do. So that's second in line in neural pathways, that culture and society that's inside of you, the reason you love Sweet Home Alabama. All right, peers and friends. As social creatures, we are heavily shaped by our peers and our friends. Yes, your mama was right. You are the measure of your friends. If you have 4 broke friends, you are going to be the 5th. Because you are going to act the way that they act. You're going to do the things that they do. They are a big shaper of who we are. The people you spend time with are certainly going to shape the way that you think and the way that you operate. Number 4 is education and schooling. I used to think about this less. And people would say, you need to think about this. This is so important, and I want you to hear this. And I'm not one of those ones that's going to bang any particular drum, like I'm going to bang the homeschool drum or go to Providence drum or no public school drum. My kids all went to public school. But if you are not actively a part of shaping your child's experience as a Christian when they're in the public school, you're making a huge mistake, because it does set neural pathways in their brain, what they learn for 8 hours. What they're told. That might rattle some cages in here. I don't know. This has zero to do with politics and everything to do with Jesus, who is the King and who we follow. Those neural pathways get set. And as a parent, you're asking, what did you learn? You're asking, what did you learn that opposes the biblical worldview? And yes, your child at a young age should have a biblical worldview that is developed through community, that is developed through church, because it has everything not to do with spirituality and religion, but about their relationship with Jesus and their life. They were created for Jesus. And the further they get away, the more they will experience the pain that this world can bring. And as parents, we definitely want to be in the mix with education and schooling. They will get taught something. Social media and digital content, we probably thought this would have come before education and schooling, because we see our kids, we all are. So, I mean, all you people, we're doing it. We just got to avoid it. But it's number 5. It wasn't even the framework 12 to 15 years ago. It wouldn't have been in the top 40. For those that are over 55, news and media on an actual TV set. Whatever it is that you watch, Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, whatever your flavor. Move quickly. 7, religious and spiritual beliefs is last in the list. We need to reshuffle the deck, right? I mean, just even looking at it, I didn't make this happen. You go do the research on the interwebs, and this is the way that it lays out in terms of what is shaping us as human beings. Now, there's other things in the list. Ladies, if you think you are going to change the neural networks in the guys you're dating's mind by marrying him, that's number 13 on the list. So good luck with that, right? You aren't going to change him. Other things are, right? Okay. If you want to answer this question, like, why should we care about neuroplasticity? Like, why should we care? We are all being passively formed by something. Every one of us are. Day in, day out. We are passively being conformed to the patterns of this world. Again, the Apostle Paul would say the same thing. Some of it's benign. Like the Apostle Paul would even use some of the patterns of this world to lead groups of people to the gospel. I mean, he used pagan poetry to lead a group of people in Athens to Jesus. But there are so many things that are passively forming us. We just covered a few of the things that are on the top, some that are benign and some that can really lead us down a road and lead us away and not in closer proximity to Jesus, but further away. We are all being passively formed by something. So we want to take an active part in intentionally moving towards the things of Jesus, not to become more spiritual or religious, but to become more like him, to become connected to him, to be closer to him, like the Apostle Paul would say, everything, to grow in the knowledge of who he is. All right, secondly, where do we start? Where do we start? I mean, I think for me that's a daunting thing when you think about like, okay, good start, 11. You're here at the 11. Not only are you at church, but you're at the 11. You know, the people that at 9, I keep trying to tell them there's more seats at the 11, and you guys are faithful at the 11. It's why Dave thinks you're more attractive. It's because you're more obedient. You come to this gathering, which is what we need you to do. But where do we start? Like, this is a good start, to be in the house of the Lord together, to sing in unison together, to open up the Word of God together, to learn together, and then to head out into our community together. That is a spiritual discipline, and you get an A+ for that. But what does it look like in the day in, day out to carve out time and practice the way? I know we've got 3 ladies' Bible studies in and around the beaches area, all working through the book, Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. And I'm sure you're excited about this series. But what does it look like to practice the way of Jesus? Not to just roll off a bunch of spiritual disciplines, but what does it look like to become more like him? Where do we start? John 15:4-5 says this, "Remain in me," and this is Jesus speaking, "as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." Now, this is kind of a paradox. I didn't even mention this at 9 because in order to be in close proximity to Jesus, you have to be in close proximity to Jesus, right? In order to bear fruit, in order for this process to take place, you've got to be in the mix with Jesus. But the point here is, if it's just a spiritual discipline, if you're just trying to be a better person, and I know people start coming to church sometimes for that reason, like, hey, our kids, we need to get them in youth group. They need to be around kids that are, not as crazy and wild, that have some grounding and whatnot. But if it is not about Jesus, then one, it's not going to last. 2, what's the point? The whole point in this, and the reason that we even titled it Proximity, is the whole purpose is that we would begin to move in this way where we become one with Jesus. We become the image bearers that God calls us to. That the sanctification process that's begun, this idea of walking down this road, not self-trying, but being shaped by the same grace that rescued and saved you in the day in, day out parts of our life. The gospel is not a one-time thing. It's a continual walk down a road with Jesus. So the first part of this is, where do we start? First, you got to check your motivation. Like, what's your motivation? If it's motivated by, I just need to get better, that's why I came to church, I just want to be a little bit better person, good luck with that. I mean, if it doesn't have anything to do with Jesus and the gospel, then you're in big trouble. And the point here is, checking your motivation goes right to Romans chapter 12, verse 1. He says, in view of God's mercy, he starts off, he said 11 chapters of you didn't do anything, God did everything. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. I keep sinning, and everything I want to do, I don't do. This is the Apostle Paul. Everything that I plan to do, I don't do. And all the things I try not to do, I keep on doing. I mean, he's talking, this is the Apostle Paul. He's saying, I can't get it done. But thank goodness that grace abounds more than my sin. Thank goodness that the cross exists. Thank goodness I didn't have to climb up and find my way all the way up to God, that Jesus came all the way down into my mess. Not only to be here and die for me, but to understand me. As the Hebrews would say, the empathetic priest that will walk down similar roads to us, that would have a job, like we have. No majesty about him. He was human. And in every way, to take on the sin of the world, your sin, your shame, and trade with us and give us his righteousness. So the motivation, the Apostle Paul was saying in those first 11 chapters of Romans, the gospel is the motivation. He says, in view of, in light of God's mercy, in light of all this stuff I've said, that's how we live. It's not, hey, you should live so that God approves of you. It's out of the approval of God that you received from the cross of Jesus Christ that we can live this life, that we can actually walk towards life instead of continue to walk towards death. This whole series is about walking towards life with Jesus, because the closer in proximity we are, when we cease to run and rebel and run from home, and we come home to Jesus, then we're moving towards life. It's like this. It's like, because when I think about disciplines, it is habits. It is things that you have to say, I got to get up early. I got to do these things. I'm going to meet up with these people at this particular time. It does. It takes discipline. It takes forming those new neural networks. It takes shutting down the bad road. Like maybe you got a road that on your farm that leads to somewhere that it shouldn't. And that neural pathway is set, and you think you can't get out of it. It's about ceasing to walk back down that road and fighting your way to create a new path. And for this to become the prominent path and this one to begin to fade away. It's exactly how the brain works. It's like when you quit using this pathway, all of a sudden, guess what happens? The weeds start growing up, the dendrites and the neural networks start to shut down, and the new pathway is the one that's used now. And this was just a shadow of the past. That could be our life with sin and shame and the things that we want to leave behind. Some of you think, I can't stop looking at this. I can't stop walking down these roads. I failed over and over and over again, and you've allowed the enemy to listen or to speak over you. But part of it does take practice. But that practice is a joy. It's like football. I love football. I did in high school. High school football in the South is amazing. It's like one of those Friday night. Nobody likes football in here? I guess it's not football season. I loved football. It just was exciting, everything about it. But with football, like to have Friday night lights, I just remember the butterflies you'd have before kickoff, before that first hit, Pow, and then all of a sudden it was just like, it's on, man, and you just went crazy. But to do it, who played? Anybody in here play high school football? Couple people, couple guys like, yeah, I played football. That's right, I did. Linebacker. What was the worst part of football? Anybody? Practice? Which practice though? It was like 2-a-days. I heard it. 2-a-days. I was in Tallahassee, which is like the hottest place on the planet. At least to me it was. And 2-a-days in August, it's just hotter there. Like, I don't know why, sea breeze, I guess, where we are coastally, but I mean, humid every day at 1:39. It would pour down raining for just enough time to make it like as humid as the Amazon rainforest. It was just awful. Like you would every bit of your moisture in your body would get sucked out in the first 20 minutes. And back then in the 80s, they would deprive you of water as, that was just what they did. Like, as punishment. Oh, you didn't run fast enough? Well, you don't get any water this next round. Nowadays you can't do that. People be dying, But back then, we was hotter than y'all, We was hard. But I loved it. Like there was something about it. Like you dreaded it. Like you had butterflies. You would get in the Oklahoma drills, and you get the 6'4" guy that was 250 pounds and be across from you. You're like, Coach, do you see me? I'm 165 soaking wet with nickels in my pocket, and you got me next to this guy. There was just so much about it that should have felt like torture, but the payoff. I remember being in my swimming pool with most of my teammates because I lived pretty close to the school, and we were just floating in there, just appreciating not being at practice, but then remembering when you're there, like the fond memory of the sacrifice that you made in practice to get to that place that was so amazing. And thinking, I would never, and in fact, that was so much a part of the journey of becoming one with a team, to play together, to win and walk to victory together. Because you went to battle together every week. You went through 2-a-days together, and you got it. You could look across to the guy that was next to you on the line or in the backfield or on defense, and you thought, we went through 2-a-days. And it wasn't something that you were like, you loved to do it. There was a payoff to practice. There was a joy to it. It's like, I said this in the first gathering. I've used this example before. It's like date night. I've been married to my wife for almost 30 years. And we do date night every Thursday night. I mean, without fail, like we just do it. People are like, they try to plan things. They're like, can't you skip date night? No, we cannot. We know better than to do it. Our marriage means that much. We haven't always done it, but we've been pretty committed to it for a while now. And sometimes we're both like, we fight. Every time we get in the car to go on date night, literally the 10 minutes to the restaurant or wherever we're going, for whatever reason, Satan just jumps in the car and says, you guys are going to fight. You're going to fight each other right here in the car. And we fight the whole time. And we could avoid all that if we just didn't do date night. And we have to like prompt each, like we bring these cards with us. We have all these check-in questions. I mean, some of you guys are like, dude, you have caved, man. No, it's awesome. It really is. But they're like, how have you loved me well this week? How have I not loved you well? We do all those. I hate those. But we do them. We do them. But it's a moment in that we get out of the house at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. I'm looking across at this woman. I remember her. I look at her face and I'm like, she's just as beautiful now as she was when she was 17. I'm reminded of all the reasons I fell in love with her. Yes, is it a practice? Is it something that we have to do? Could we avoid all the fights? Could we, burn those checking questions in the fire pit, which I've threatened to do before? Yes. But it's a spiritual, it's a practice that brings such joy. I wouldn't miss it for the world. And on the other side of it, when we finish those date nights, we always say the same thing. I'm so glad we did that. I'm so glad that we do this. And every couple that we counsel, we tell them, do this. We don't have any hard data, no marriage counseling, degree of any kind to tell people, but we're like, this works. And we're pretty sure it's universal. It's going to be a good thing for people to get out of the rest of the world, shut the rest of the world off, lock in, eyeball to eyeball, and talk and remember, reminisce, ask each other questions, and go through that whole process. It is amazing. And what does it do? You're to become one flesh, right? Leave your mother and father, become one flesh. That's what that's doing. There's so many ways that God provides that in the marriage covenant, but date night is something where we can be faithful to the covenant that way, and we come together. Think about how Jesus describes us as the church. We're the bride of Christ. There's this idea that Christ loved the church. Like husbands, you should love your wives like Christ loves the church. That example is there for a reason. Because it's a relationship. And it's about proximity. It's about coming together. It's about you becoming more and more like Christ. Any of you that have been married for any season of time, isn't it funny? You come together, you realize how different you are in year 1. And then you get year 8, year 10, you start finishing each other's sentences. And there's some things that you do that are the same. Like you start appreciating the same jokes, same shows, same stuff. There's still differences because we're different people with different identities that God's given us. But you become one flesh. But I'm motivated, not because I should do it, because I love to do date night. I love to do it. That's how we're motivated. So we need to check our motivation. Number 2, where do we start? Pull back the curtain for all to see. If you got your Bible, or just write it in the margin, read it on the screen. 1 John 1, 5-7 says, this is the message we have heard from you, or have heard from him, and proclaim to you, that God is light. In him is no darkness at all. If we say we have fellowship with him and we walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. So in other words, if we're keeping some things in the dark, if we're covering some things up, then we don't practice the truth. If we walk in the light, exposing things. As he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. You find people, and the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses us from all sin. So the idea here, back to neuroplasticity and spiritual neuroplasticity, it's exposing those pathways that are leading us to nowhere. Those habits, those things that are in our mind, the way that we've conformed to the pattern of this world, and saying, okay, not only do I need to look at this, but I need somebody that I trust to look at this with me. Like I need somebody to be in the war with me, to help me create a new pathway, to be accountable to kind of be in the mix with. You see, what happens to many of us, and this is something that happens in the brain, there's something called a neural rut. It's like a pathway that gets stuck. Like it shuts down neuroplasticity. I mean, you can look the term up, and social psychologists say there's people that literally their brain gets to this place where it's immalleable, and either from trauma, from just a fear base, or just from a habit that's kind of been placed, whether it's alcoholism or drug addiction, or just a pattern that they've got in their life that's unhealthy. And people around them can see it, and they're like, why don't you just stop doing that? And they're like, I can't. I mean, they just can't. And you can see that it's somebody that's got an issue with narcissism or pride, or, I mean, it can be in any particular area, and it becomes a rut. It's so deep, it's the neural pathway is so deep that they don't even feel like they have an option to start cutting through the thicket in other areas to head down a road that's productive as opposed to the one that's causing their marriages to break up, causing their worlds to explode. You picking up what I'm laying down? These neural ruts? I mean, this is so biblical. You can apply this so spiritually because it's what we do. God knew how he created us and knew that we would get in these sinful ruts, and we would need a spiritual jackhammer to get us out. And one of those ways is to pull the covers off of everything, not only with you, but with other people. I don't know if anybody ever uses Rocket Money. Anybody use Rocket Money for your finances? I'm a Rocket Money person. But you know what Rocket Money does? It exposes you. You know what I mean? When I plugged all my cards up to Rocket Money, it helps you budget and shows you where you're spending all your money. And sometimes you want to just live on the Strawberry River and not know where I just spent all my money, right? You're just like, I don't know why we're out of money. We had fun last month though, right? You just like don't care. But Rocket Money doesn't let you do that. It's like you pump it all in there, and then all of a sudden there's this embarrassing pie chart that says entertainment. And you're like, I don't even know how I did that. Like you just don't even, like that's just shocking and embarrassing. Like you put it, like I remember putting it in initially, and I thought I'm doing pretty good, and I had forgot that one card, you know, that where all the stuff is. Like this is where our whole life is on this one, and I put that card in there, and the pie chart went. I was like, oh, it's not so good. It's not good. Like, you know, I don't know. Maybe some of you are like, I am just fantastic with money when you do Rocket Money. That's not me. And here's the other piece of that. Being able to, like when you have financial problems, again, this is just an illustration, but when you're down and in that place, what most people are unwilling to do, they might say, man, we're hitting the financial straits. And then you begin to ask why, and people are like, oh yeah, we just, it's just, they don't pay me enough at my job, and blah, 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 blah. And you put it in the Rocket Money, and then you show it to, we have a finance committee, and Jeff Arkell was here. He does this with people, and it's amazing. But he'll look at your Rocket Money, and he'll be like, I can tell you why you're broke. It's right there. Like he's just like, maybe you should stop doing that. He's going to look at it and go, hey, here's the thing that's causing you the problem. And in life, with our sin, with the things that, whether it's pornography, I mean, that's just one of those things that we like to heap a lot of stuff on top of and just forget about. I think even the wives of men that are addicted to pornography would rather not know in many ways. And that's just it's just unhealthy. It needs to be brought to the light and exposed in a healthy way, because it's not that neural pathway is one of the strongest on the planet. Scientists will tell you that. Like that is one that needs a spiritual jackhammer. It needs accountability. It needs somebody in the camp with you. It needs other people saying, hey, let's push the shame aside. Jesus died for the shame, and let's have a normal conversation about it. That's how you start to get through the thicket. That's how you start to get the jackhammer out to deal with it. You do it in accountability. Get involved in a city group. Now, it's not going to happen day one in a city group. You're not going to go in there the beginning of the season in the fall or the spring and walk in and confess all your sin day 1 to 20 people in your city group. It's just probably, they will all find another city group. But you might meet somebody in that city group that you get close to. Again, this takes time. It takes commitment. It starts with a commitment. And then you meet somebody, and then you start going down that road, right? And you're like, hey, man, we're going to meet on Fridays and get coffee. And we're going to talk about stuff. We're going to walk on the beach, and we're going to talk about our husbands or talk about our wives, talk about our people, and then we're going to pray for one another. We're going to maybe ask each other about that thing that we said we were struggling with the previous week. What's going on with the thing? What's happening with the stuff? All of a sudden, you got somebody in there helping you cut a new pathway to the better cabin where Jesus is, right? It's a different way of thinking. We got to pull back the curtain for all to see, or at least those people that we trust in community. Thirdly, the good news of small steps. So we want to check our motivation. It should be the gospel. It should be the idea that I love to go. I go to practice. The payoff for practice is Friday Night Lights. The payoff for practice and stepping into this is date night across from the person that has sacrificed for me unconditionally. 2, to pull back the curtains for all to see, and the good news of small steps. Matthew 13, 31 and 32. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, very small, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all the seeds, when it grows, which takes time, by the way, it is the largest of the garden plants. It becomes a tree so that the birds come and perch in its branches. What a beautiful picture of neural networks. Is a seed that gets roots, it gets the trees and the branches and all of the stuff grows, but it starts with small steps. It starts with the small stuff. The enemy wants to tell you that small steps are not valuable. That 5 minutes, that ride in the car, that 5 minutes of listening to a portion of a passage in Scripture in the car, if I can't do it the way that I like to, this is where I get my OCD. If I can't get my journal out and my book out and my Bible out, get my coffee with my REI mug, which I really like, if I get all that out, it starts to feel like devotion time with Jesus, like we're going to have date night with Jesus deal, and I want to get it all set. I want to have time. Nobody's going to interrupt me. And if I can get all that out, then I'm going to do, now that's when I can do my quiet time. And if I can't do that, then I'm just like, well, we'll try again tomorrow. But at the small steps, my dad, God bless him, he ran when I was younger until he blew his knees out. He ran 6 miles a day. Didn't take a rest day, which is why he had 2 knee replacements. Never rested, no repair time. But he had OCD, like mildly, and he was military, went to the Citadel. He didn't understand, and to grow up in that, it's just like, 6 miles, I'm not doing the 6 miles all the time. He's just like, and he didn't understand me and my brother. He's like, I don't understand how you lose your keys. How does anybody, I'm like, we're human, you're subhuman, and we are normal people that lose keys. And some of you probably are like that. You're like, never lose my keys. I always put them in the same place every time. I don't know, you should go back to where it was. It's like you pick them up and they're there. Some of us lose keys, all right? But maybe if you can't run the 4 miles or the 6 miles, you walk around the block every day. Say, you know what, I might not have time to do it. I've run out of time. It's getting dark. I'm going to walk around the block. I'm going to walk to the pier and back. I'm going to walk to the beach and back. Again, illustration of time with Jesus and beginning this process. And we're going to talk about practically in this series. I'm so excited about what some of these things look like. Some of these we're going to do together. We're going to create some accountability right here at Ocean City Church. But what does it look like to just do a few minutes? What does it look like to start somewhere and say, I'm just going to do a little bit of that? I was looking at all the musicians up here and thinking about, I know how some of them started playing music because I've talked to them. But how did they start? They didn't all start just shredding like Mike Berry up here. He's just Michael J. Fox and Back to the Future. He's just shredding and getting down. And you don't start that. It starts simple. And sometimes you think, I'm too old to get started. I started when I was 29. My wife got me a guitar for an anniversary gift. And I'm not some of the best guitar player on the planet, but I'm good. I'm a good guitar player, good keys player. And people are in their 20s telling me, it's just, I wish I'd have played when I grew up. I'm like, I started when I was 29. Start tomorrow. And how do you start? Little steps. I remember I'd want to learn one chord, a week. I'd be like, I'm going to learn G. I'm going to learn G. It's going to happen. And then I'd get another one in there. And then it was a song a week. I learned the whole catalog of Jimmy Buffett by the end of a year, Margaritaville. I didn't get wasted away, though. I just had a margarita occasionally. But you just do it in small steps. The enemy will tell you it's not worth it. Just give up and walk away. You just begin with those small steps, remembering that you're not earning your salvation, you're walking towards freedom. I think sometimes we think we're earning something and you can't earn it. You didn't earn it. But we get this opportunity to join hands with Jesus and walk towards freedom. Jesus says this, and I love this because I want us to think this is not about adding things to the list in our relationship with God. That's the beauty of the payoff of being able to come together and wage war and practice with one another. Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest." Jesus says, come to me and you'll have rest for your souls. Take my yoke and learn from me. My burden's light. I've got a different way of doing things. I'm gentle and humble in heart. Do you want to find rest for your souls? Come to me. My yoke is easy. My burden is light. This whole thing is not about adding things to your list. I remember years ago when I got out of college, I got this marketing job, and I worked on a floor it was all women. It was 15 women and Derek. And so the owner of the company was a guy, and his wife wouldn't let him travel with any of the other sales execs because they were all women. And lucky me, he had to have a travel partner and liked to have somebody to travel with. And I was pretty young in the company, 23 years old. And we had our Central and Southern California division. He would fly out there all the time. And I just always flew with him. And I'd see the ladies like, see y'all, I'll be back next week. I'm going to the Four Seasons, Biltmore. I'm gonna get my tan on. They would all be like, I was like, well, you're a girl. And I remember I remember getting ready to travel the first time with this guy. His name was Mike Floyd. He's passed away. He was Christian, loved Jesus. And president of the company. I was a little nervous, but I'm like ready to carry all the bags and do all the stuff and unload the car and go through the airport, check the thing, and go all the burden of what you do to travel. And I roll up, and Mike, the president of the company, first of all, he's wealthy. He's got this big wad of cash he travels with. He's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm getting the bags out. We got to get in the thing and do the check thing. He goes, no. He goes, you never seen a sky cap before? He's like, watch this. He knows all the sky caps because he travels all the time. He calls, Teddy, come over here. And he throws Teddy his $30. And Teddy grabs all the stuff. Like everything that we brought, just starts loading it on a cart. And I'm like, the Mike just starts walking. He's the president of the company. He's like, where are you going? He's like, just come with me. He's like, Teddy's got all the stuff. He's like, you think I'm the president of the company? You think I'm gonna carry all this stuff? I got people. I got people, man. We're gonna go. And we didn't no check-in, no stuff. We just went through the little line, through the thing, to the turnstile, all our bags in the deal. Never had to worry about a thing. All of the burden of travel. I just didn't think, oh yeah, I'm traveling with the president of the company. This is a little different. You're traveling with the president of the company. Jesus says, come with me. We're gonna travel a little different. My yoke, my burden is easy. We got sky caps. We got a different way of doing things. I'm not adding things to what you're doing. I'm not burdening you. I'm not shackling you. I'm not adding chains. I'm leading you to freedom where you're not going to be carrying anything. That road, that old neural pathway, that old pattern that you've conformed to, that's the prison. This new one that we're cutting through together with the machete that might take today, tomorrow, the next day, this year, I'm doing it with you. And that's the path to freedom. That's the path to freedom. And it happens bit by bit by bit. We don't want to go back down that road. The Apostle Paul would say, why would we ever submit once again to slavery? For freedom, Christ has set us free. He's done it. He spread himself out on the cross. He bled out into the soil of Mount Calvary that we might be free. So why do we do it? Do you want to be free? I'm just going to ask. Do you want to be free? I want to be free. Let's stand.